Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group MACV-SOG was a highly classified, multi-service United States Special Operations Unit which conducted covert unconventional warfare operations prior to and during the Vietnam War. Established on 24 January 1964, the unit conducted strategic reconnaissance missions in the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, carried out the capture of enemy prisoners, rescued downed pilots, conducted rescue operations to retrieve prisoners of war throughout Southeast Asia, and conducted clandestine agent team activities and psychological operations. The unit participated in most of the significant campaigns of the Vietnam War, including the Gulf of Tonkin incident which precipitated increased American involvement, Operation Steel Tiger, Operation Tiger Hound, the Tet Offensive, Operation Commando Hunt, the Cambodian Campaign, Operation Lam Son 719, and the Easter Offensive. The unit was downsized and renamed Strategic Technical Directorate Assistance Team 158 on 1 May 1972 to support the transfer of its work to the Strategic Technical Directorate of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, part of the Vietnamization effort. The Studies and Observations Group, also known as SOG, MACV-SOG, and MACV-SOG, was a top-secret, joint unconventional warfare task force created on 24 January 1964 by the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a subsidiary command of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV. The unit would eventually consist primarily of personnel from the United States Army Special Forces, the United States Navy SEALs, the United States Air Force, USAF, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and elements of the United States Marine Corps Force reconnaissance units.
I am your host, Bruce Christensen.
Major Larry Thorne was born as Lauri Allan Törni on May 28, 1919 in Viipuri, in southern Finland near Russia. His father, Jalmari, was a ship captain, and his mother was named Rosa. Törni also had two younger sisters, Sam and Kaija. He spent his younger years playing sports and was friends with Sten Suvio, the future 1936 Olympic boxing gold medalist. Following business school, Törni served in the Finnish White Guard. The White Guard was a volunteer militia that was created in 1918 to oppose the Soviet Communist Red Guard. Many of the White Guards were recruits, draftees and German-trained Jägers, highly skilled light infantry. Törni officially enlisted in the Finnish military in 1938, joining the 4th Independent Jäger Infantry Battalion stationed at Kiviniemi, along the shores of the Gulf of Bothnia between Finland and Sweden. Törni re-enlisted when the Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland began in November 1939. Törni and his troops met the invading USSR army at Radu, on the Karelian Isthmus, land bridge, between his birth town, Viipuri, and St. Petersburg. During military engagements at Lake Ladoga, Törni was a part of eliminating the surrounding Soviet army divisions in Lemedi. The Winter War of 1939 and 1940 was unusually frigid, with temperatures plummeting to record lows of 45 degrees Fahrenheit. At the start of the combat, active-duty Finnish soldiers were issued weapons, gear and winter clothing. These elite Finnish soldiers were highly trained and experienced in cross-country skiing. The Finns were comfortably at home in the freezing winter weather, high snow drifts, thick forests and extended hours of darkness, and used these to their benefit. They donned layers of clothing and thin snow capes to obscure their silhouettes. Their snow camouflage gave the ski troopers a high advantage and blended them in with their surroundings as they engaged in unconventional guerrilla warfare against the invading Soviets. Törni's head officers took notice of his conduct and actions during several battles. Towards the close of the war, Törni was selected for officer training and was given a commission as Van Ricky, second lieutenant, in the reserves. After the Winter War, in June 1941, Törni was sent to Vienna, Austria for 7 weeks of training with the Waffen-SS and returned to his home country. Now as a Finnish officer, the Germans acknowledged him as an Untersturmführer or a junior storm leader in the German SS. Törni continued on as a Finnish military officer during many successful conflicts in the Continuation War, 1941-1944, where Finland again faced the Soviet Red Army. In 1943, he commanded a unit casually named Detachment TO_RNI. Detachment Törni was made up of infantry troops that would infiltrate deep behind enemy lines. After several engagements, they earned a name for themselves because of their capabilities during combat. One of the soldiers who served under Törni was none other than the future president of Finland Mauno Koivisto, who served from 1982 to 1994. Kavisto served in a recon squadron in the Battle of Ilamansi, the last confrontation in the Continuation War, during July and August of 1944. Detachment Torni caused such heavy losses to Soviet divisions that a reward of 3 million Finnish marks on his head, just over $315,000 in today's US dollars, in July 9, 1944, Torni was awarded the Mannerheim Cross. Soldiers received the Mannerheim Cross for extraordinary courage, for the efforts of valuable purposes by combat or for notably well-operated missions. During the Moscow Armistice in September 1944, Finland was required to remove German troops within their borders. This developed into the Lapland War. At this time, many of the Finnish army was disarmed and deactivated. Torni was now faced with living life as a civilian by November of 1944. In January of 1945, a pro-German resistance movement recruited Torni. He then departed for saboteur training in Germany. This particular military group had one goal in mind: creating a fighting opposition in the event that Finland was overrun by the Soviet Union. At the end of training in March 1945, Torni had no way to get back to Finland, so he joined a German army unit and engaged with the Red Army in northeastern Germany near Schwerin. During the final stages of World War II, Torni surrendered to British troops and was sent to a POW camp in Lübeck, Germany. After escaping, he made his way back to his homeland. Torni found that his family had been moved from their hometown, so he made plans to meet them in Helsinki. Before he arrived, he was found and arrested by the Valpo, the Finnish state police. He escaped from their custody and was arrested again in April of 1946. This time, he faced crimes of treason because of his involvement in supporting the German army. After trial and official sentencing, Torni again escaped. This time from the Turku provincial prison. He was recovered and sent to the Riihimäki state prison. At the end of 1948, Finnish President Juho Paasikivi pardoned him. In 1949, Torni and Holger Pitkänen, a fellow veteran from the war, made their way to Sweden. Their destination was Stockholm, where they were protected by the von Essens, a Swedish family with Baltic Germanic roots who harbored many fugitive Finnish officers after the war. Torni then fell in love with a Swedish Finn, Marja Kops. Not too long afterwards, they were engaged to be married. However, Torni had to raise enough money first. He gained passage as a Swedish seaman under an assumed name aboard the SS Bolivia. The Bolivia was destined for Caracas, Venezuela, where he met several other former Finnish military officers who were living as fugitives in Venezuela after the war. From Caracas, in 1950, Torni began working on a Swedish cargo ship, the MS Skagen, that was bound for the United States. Many of the first Green Berets were immigrants. Through the encouragement of his fellow Finns, Thorne joined the U.S. Army Special Forces, also known as the Green Berets. After graduating from the grueling induction training, he used the vast array of skills he had from fighting against Soviet Russia and became a ski instructor, trained fellow troops in wilderness survival, mountaineering and guerrilla warfare. As a part of his Special Forces training, Thorne completed airborne school and soon received his sergeant's stripes. After 5 years in the U.S. Army Special Forces, Thorne received his full U.S. citizenship. He could have gotten out of the army and lived a good life as a civilian. However, he had so much more of himself to give. He completed Officer Candidate School, OCS, and was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the Signal Corps. By 1960, he was promoted to captain. From 1958-1962, Thorne served in the 10th Special Forces Group in West Germany at Bad Tolz, located in southeastern Germany. One of the missions he is most famous for was when he was second in command during a search and recovery mission in the extreme heights of the Zagros Mountains of Iran. A U.S. Air Force transport plane that was carrying top-secret papers went down and scattered everything across the Zagros Mountains at the average height of 14,900 feet. After several attempts by the U.S. Air Force and the West German Army were unsuccessful, Thorne and his Green Berets were called up. Under Thorne's supreme leadership and experience in operating in high altitudes, the men achieved their mission and found the airplane that had crashed on an icy glacier. They were able to recover every document and retrieve all the bodies of the crew members and brought everything back home to base. While stationed in Germany, Thorne was able to visit some of his family in Finland, who he had not seen during the past 10 years. One would think that Larry Thorne had enough of war, having fought the Soviet Union with both the Finnish and German armies. However, duty called once more. In November 1963, Thorne deployed across the Pacific to assist the Republic of Vietnam, that would be South Vietnam, for the Vietnam War. Thorne, with the Special Forces Detachment A734, set up camp in the Ten Bien district near the Cambodian border. They were selected to operate Civilian Irregular Defense Group (CIDG) encampments at Chu Lang and eventually in Ten Bien. CIDG was made up of small teams from the U.S. Army Special Forces. They set up in villages throughout South Vietnam and concentrated on area defense and civic engagements. Although the South Vietnamese Army was present, the US Special Forces troops did most of the training. Thorne received 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star with V for Valor after defending an attack on a CIDG encampment in Ten Bien. To read further on this battle, I recommend you reading the book The Green Berets written by Robin Moore. After his first encounter with fighting the North Vietnamese communist, Thorne returned to the US for some R&R and definitely more training. His second tour started in February 1965, where he flew to South Vietnam with the 5th Special Forces Group. While in country, Thorne became a part of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group MACV-SOG. The 1-0 for MACV-SOG's first cross-border operation was Master Sergeant Charles Slatz Petrie, whose team, RT Iowa, included 7 Nungs, 1 South Vietnamese lieutenant, and the 1-1 Sergeant First Class Willie Card. RT Iowa wore no rank or unit insignia, and even their uniforms were untraceable. For weapons, they carried 1945 9mm submachine guns, Swedish Ks and Belgian-made Browning 9mm pistols. If captured, the men were to claim that they'd stumbled into Laos while looking for a missing C-123 and had no idea they'd crossed a border. Petrie and RT Iowa were briefed extensively. Although Hanoi denied having a single soldier in Laos, by October 1965 its security, engineer, and logistics troops numbered at least 30,000, plus an additional 4,500 men passing through each month en route to South Vietnam. About 200 truckloads of supplies rolled down the trail monthly, and by late 1965, the US Air Force already knew the enemy had spun its 900-mile road system the length of Laos to Vietnam's Central Highlands. RT Iowa's objective was designated Target D1, about 20 miles northwest of Cam Duc, where Laotian Highway 165 almost reached the South Vietnamese border. Intelligence believed the NVA were infiltrating troops and carrying supplies through D1 for attacks on Da Nang and Chu Lai. Far beyond the range of any US artillery, if Petrie and his men got into trouble they'd depend upon Thai-based fighter bombers for fire support. On Monday, 18 October 1965, RT Iowa's men stood beside the airstrip at Cam Duc. They planned to land at last light, so it would be dark before the NVA could send a reaction force or trackers after them, giving Petrie men at least a full night head start. At 6 p.m. Captain Thorne wished Petrie good luck and waved RT Iowa to 3 unmarked H-34 King B helicopters, which cranked engines and then lifted away. RT Iowa rode the first bird, while Captain Thorne rode aboard the second of 3 King Bs. Over Laos the weather proved especially hazardous, and they began taking 50 caliber machine gun fire, but the King Bs took no hits. Soon they met the Forward Air Controller, FAC, a tiny 01 spotter plane flown by U.S. Air Force Major Harley Piles, with a SOG Air Liaison Officer, U.S. Marine Captain Winfield Sisson, in the backseat. Minutes later, the H-34s went in a downward spiral and then roared away, and it was done. SOG's first American-led team had landed in Laos. In case Petrie's team ran into trouble, Captain Thorne kept his King B overhead, sending the other helicopters back to Cam Duc. Soon, Petrie radioed an OK, and then Thorne radioed Cam Duc that he, too, was headed back. The Finnish Americans H-34 did not return, and Larry Thorne was never seen again. Then the FAC-01 Bird Dog lifted off for Da Nang Air Base, with U.S. Air Force Major Piles and U.S. Marine Captain Sisson aboard. They, too, disappeared. In its first day, Shining Brass had generated 3 people missing in action, MIA. Meanwhile, beneath heavy overcast and drizzle, RT Iowa found Target D1 crawling with NVA, but the enemy was preoccupied with his own labors, and at first Petrie had an easy go of it. On the third day, Petrie heard truck engines, so he maneuvered RT Iowa to investigate and they bumped head-on into an NVA patrol. In the quick exchange of fire, RT Iowa's Nung Point man collapsed, mortally wounded, and the chase was on. The North Vietnamese fanned out, searching high and low for them. 2 days later the weather broke, and RT Iowa struck back with 37 sorties of fighter bombers before the King Bs lifted them out. Then Petrie went back with a FAC and called in an additional 51 sorties on targets he had discovered, touching off numerous secondary explosions. For his actions, Thorne received the rank of Major and was awarded the Legion of Merit and the Distinguished Flying Cross. For almost 35 years, Larry Thorne's whereabouts were unknown until, in 1999, his remains were recovered by a Finnish and Joint Task Force full accounting team whose mission was to search for soldiers who either went missing in action or were prisoners of war. One of the members of the Finnish team was Thorne's own nephew, Juha Hala. Thorne's remains were returned to the US after a memorial ceremony at the Noi Bai International Airport in Hanoi. Officially analyzed and identified in 2003, Thorne's body was placed in the ground on June 26, 2003, at Arlington National Cemetery, Virginia, alongside the other fatalities from Operation Shining Brass, who were reclaimed from the crash site. Larry Thorne's name was imprinted on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial on panel 02E, line 126. His fiancée, Marja Copps, later remarried. Larry Thorne, the true American hero.